Okay, so we're making bagels today. Not just regular bagels, we're making Montreal-style bagels because that is my preference. So I'm just going to orient you to the ingredients that I have here. I measured this out or timed this out the last time I made them, and it literally takes 2 hours from the time you start making the bagels until they come out of the oven and they're ready to eat. So if you want to eat your bagels the same day, I recommend that you do that timing. So either you're going to get up really early in the morning if you want those bagels for breakfast, or you serve them at brunch. It gives you a little bit more time. Anyway, so let's talk about the ingredients that you need to make bagels. So the first thing you need is water, and the recipe says warm water. I think room temperature water is fine. You just don't want cold water from the sink. So you can leave it out at room temperature, or you can use like maybe some water that was in your kettle that has cooled down quite a bit. You don't want it to be too hot. This really helps with the yeast. So the water goes into our big bowl first. The next thing we need is 60 grams of sugar. So I realize not everybody likes to measure stuff, but 60 grams comes up to, it's a little bit more than a quarter of a cup, but it is less than a third of a cup. So just so that you kind of know. So there goes the sugar into the water. We also need 10 grams of yeast. So this is instant yeast. You can use any kind of yeast. I'm also going to talk a little bit about experimentally, I made some with sourdough. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you're just regular yeast, I buy it in a jar like this and I keep it in the fridge, but you can buy it in the packets as well. So I think 10 grams might be one packet, which is about 2.5 teaspoons of instant yeast. So I'm going to put something in the Substack, the difference between instant yeast and regular yeast and all of that, but this is what I had on hand, so that's going in as well. I'm going to just give this a little bit of a stir, mix it up. So the sugar helps the yeast to, it feeds the yeast to help with the rising. The next thing that's going to go in, I have in here some oil. It's 30 grams of oil, which is about 2 tablespoons, and 20 grams of honey, which again is about 1 tablespoon, about 1 tablespoon. So that goes in. So as I always talk about, I like to measure everything out ahead of time to add in, rather than measuring as I go, and then that way I don't forget anything, right? So there's my oil. So it's just kind of, there we go, all mixed in. I'm going to throw some salt in. This is 8 grams, which is about a teaspoon or so, maybe a little bit more than a teaspoon. And then the last thing I'm going to put in, my egg is back here. I already cracked it. So 1 egg, and that goes in. So I have 1 egg. I'm just going to whip this up. Now, the other thing I've measured out is my flour. Because, due to humidity and stuff, you may or may not, you need all the flour that the recipe calls for. So you measure it out and then you just add it in little bits. So I've kind of mixed all of this together. I'm just kind of trying to create some room here because I'm going to be kneading my dough. So there you can kind of see, it's just kind of a liquidy mixture. All right. So I'm going to add my flour a little bit at a time. So what I've done is I've weighed out 700 grams of flour. If I had to guess, it's probably about 6 cups. Yeah, 5 or 6 cups of flour. And this is just regular all-purpose flour. You could also use bread flour. Either one will work. You don't want to use cake and pastry flour. So I think I've probably talked about it before, but I'll mention it again. What the difference is with it's based on the amount of protein. So all-purpose flour is in the middle in terms of the amount of protein. I don't know the numbers exactly in terms of grams of protein. Bread flour has more protein because protein is what creates gluten, and gluten is what creates the structure and the stretchiness in the dough that you want in a bread, whereas in a cake you don't want that. And so cake and pastry flour has less protein in it, so it's lower. No, it's not gluten-free, that's for sure. It still has gluten in it, but it just doesn't have as much. Okay, so I've added probably 3/4 of the flour, and I'm just kind of mixing the dough. What you're looking for is a bread dough consistency. So if you've made bread before, that's the consistency of the dough that you're looking for. So right now it's kind of like maybe a little bit thicker than a cake batter, maybe almost like a thick pancake batter. So I need to add a little bit more flour. And as I said, the humidity is going to make a difference. So if you're in a more humid environment, then you might need a little bit more flour. It really depends. Okay, so you kind of have to do this by feel. Once it gets to a certain point, then it's probably better to put it out on the counter and knead it that way. So you can see now it's kind of like a shaggy dough. So I'm just going to turn this out onto my counter. Try and get as much of that flour and everything else as possible into the bowl. The other thing I have off to the side here, I can't see it yet, is a bowl that has some oil in it. The reason for that is we want to let the dough rest, and we want it to rest in an oiled bowl so that it doesn't stick to the bowl. So you can kind of see the texture here of the bread dough. I'm probably still going to have to add a little bit more flour to it because I still have quite a bit, probably have about a cup still of flour in here. And then if I find, oh, geez, that's not even enough, I'll just add some more flour. So I'll probably speed this video up a little bit. You don't need to see me kneading for 10 minutes. Probably won't take 10 minutes, probably only take about 5 or 7 minutes. So I'm trying to incorporate as much of this as I can. And this honestly is just like making regular bread, right? The only difference, it's got an egg in it. It has some sugar and some honey in it for sweetness. That's really the only difference between this bread dough and any other type of bread dough that you would need. Okay, so I'm just going to knead, and I'll speed up the video or fade it out or something. Okay, so that was probably several minutes of kneading. The dough's kind of springy. It's nice and smooth. Just to refresh on how to knead, I did this, I think, in the pasta making video. I showed you how to knead as well. So you push forward with your hand like this, then you turn the dough a quarter turn, you pull the front part back towards you, and then you push forward again. Then you turn your dough, you pull it back, and then push it forward. So that is how you knead dough. So quarter turn, pull the front part back towards you, and then with the heel of your hand, you push and then turn and push and turn and flip and push. And that is kneading. And what kneading does is it develops the structure, the gluten structure in the dough, and makes it nice and chewy and springy. And so that's why we knead dough, but we don't overmix our cakes because, again, in a cake, you don't want that gluten formation. The gluten will be there, but it won't be as strong and as stretchy as it is with something like bread. Okay, so there's our bread dough. And I pretty much used all the flour, okay? Some of it I threw on at the end when I was kneading so that it wouldn't stick to the counter. But yeah, so that is how you knead the dough. Now, I mentioned about having a bowl with some oil in it. So I've already put the oil in here. So you just put the dough in. I like to kind of smush it around or like move it around in the bowl so that the dough is covered in oil on all sides. That way it won't stick. And you don't need a lot of oil in a bowl this size. I think I probably put 1 tablespoon of oil. So you don't want your dough to be swimming in oil or anything. And then I'm just going to get some plastic wrap and cover it. You could cover it with a towel as well, but I just find the plastic wrap helps to keep the moisture in a little bit better so it doesn't dry out. So you could put plastic like that, and you could also put a tea towel over it as well, just like that. And now I'm going to set it aside. And you set that aside for about 30 minutes to let it rest. So this dough, through the magic of television, is something that I prepared earlier. So I'm going to end up with a lot of bagels. I have this recipe makes about 16 bagels. So I'll be giving a lot of bagels away to people this week. So if you're one of my lucky local Toronto friends, you might be getting some bagels from me. So this is the dough, and you can see how it's a lot like, it's risen, it's puffed up. Now, one thing I will say is that I made this dough earlier today, and I made it differently. I didn't make it like that one. The difference that I made, and now we're getting really deep into the weeds here in terms of baking and baker's percentages and things like that, is I made this with sourdough starter because it's an experiment. I wanted to see whether it would work out with sourdough. So far, it's looking good, like it's risen, which is really nice. So this is my jar of sourdough starter. So I had fed this yesterday, brought it back to life because it usually just kind of sits in the back of my fridge, and it doesn't always, I don't use it every single week, maybe once a week or once every 10 days or so. I pull it out to make some bread. But it had been sitting in there for a little while. So I just kind of brought it back to life. I fed it last night, and it doubled in volume. So that's how I knew that it was ready to go. Now, if you are going to be using sourdough starter instead of yeast in your dough, there is basically, for every gram of yeast that your recipe calls for, you need 36 grams of sourdough starter. Okay, so that's pretty easy. So this recipe required 10 grams of yeast, so I used 360 grams of sourdough starter. That also means, though, that I need to reduce the amount of water and the amount of flour that I use in the recipe, because this already has water and flour in it. So in 360 grams of sourdough starter, it's 180 grams of flour and 180 grams of water. So I subtracted that from the amount that was called for in the recipe. Okay, so it's getting a little bit more confusing here, but otherwise you would end up with like way too much. So in order to keep the proportions and the ratio and everything the same. Okay, so that's how you do it with sourdough starter. At least that's how I'm doing it, and we'll see how it turns out. Okay, the other thing I want to point out is on the stove behind me, I have a pot of water that's boiling. I'm going to switch the camera around when I get to that part, but you need to get your pot of water going as soon as possible because you want it to be boiling, because the thing about Montreal bagels that make them different from other types of bagels, like a New York bagel or, a Toronto bagel, I don't even know there's such a thing as a Toronto bagel, is that these are boiled first. So you, almost like a pretzel where you boil them. These bagels are boiled in honeyed water. So I'm going to put some honey in that boiling water, and you boil the bagels for about 2 minutes first, let them drain. Then you put sesame seeds on them. I like to dip them on all sides on sesame seeds, and then you bake them. You let them rest for a bit, and then you bake them in the oven. So I'm going to show you all of that. The other thing I have to remember to do is turn my oven on to 450. Okay, so let me turn this dough out onto the counter. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to put this. I also have my scale because, as I said, this is going to be roughly 16 bagels, and I want them to kind of be about the same size. So I'm going to just turn this on. I'm going to weigh it. Weighs about 1,150 grams. Let's say 1,200-ish. So you want to get 16 pieces, roughly the same size. Mine probably are not. I'm going to end up weighing them, and I'll speed the video up. You don't need to see me weighing everything. Okay, so I've weighed them all out, and each one's around 70, 75 grams, something like that. Just going to roll them into balls. Okay, so I'm going to roll these out into like a long sort of rope shape, about 10 to 12 inches. You don't really need to put flour on here because there's enough oil in here that it's not really going to stick. The counter kind of has some oil on it. So I'm just going like this. There's my rope. And then you wrap it around your hand like this. Okay, it's overlapped by, I don't know, about an inch. You go like that. And then you just set it off to the side like that. Now I'm going to cover these as I work. I'm going to cover them with a towel so that they don't get dried out or get a crust on them, because it takes a few minutes. So here we go again. So look, I'm kind of going from the center out till it's about 12 inches long. Wrap it around my hand, go like this to seal it. Okay, and I'm going to just do the rest of them. Okay, the other thing that distinguishes a Montreal bagel from any other type of bagel is the size of the hole. So Montreal bagels are not really great for making sandwiches with, because some of the regular bagels, the hole is really, really tiny. So when you slice the bagel, there's barely a hole at all. But a Montreal bagel has, I mean, look at the size of the hole. It goes like, it wraps right around my hand. Now that's going to tighten up a little bit once the dough has rested. But I mean, look, that's a fairly big hole in this bagel. So it is going to be, it's a different style of bagel, right? I should have mentioned that off the top. So there's my second to last one. And then I think I have one that's maybe not quite the amount of dough. It doesn't quite measure up. I should have done the math before, but you know, whatever. Wrap that around. Okay, there's the last one done. Okay, so I'm just going to move my camera around so that you can see the water boiling and you can see me boiling the bagels before they end up going in the oven. So let these rest for a little bit. Every time you work with your dough and you get it kind of all riled up and you're working with it and you're stretching out and the gluten is forming and all of that, it always needs a moment to kind of like rest and go back to, you know, its natural state, so to speak. So you always want to let things rest after you've worked it for a little while. So probably about 20 minutes, just enough time that I can make sure my water's up to a boil. I can add my honey to the water, reposition my camera so that you can see what's going on behind me, and then we'll continue. Plus my oven is still preheating up to 450, and that'll take a couple minutes as well. So we'll be back in just a second. Okay, so we're back. You can see my water is boiling here. I have some honey over here. You're going to put 350 grams of honey into that water, which is quite a bit of honey. So it's not cheap. This is 500 grams. So I'm just going to kind of wing it, probably put like 3/4 of this in. What you can't see, but maybe I'll show you over here out of the camera, are my bagels. So they've been sort of sitting and resting for a little bit. They look a little bit puffy, which is good. We want them to be a little bit puffy. So, and then my water is it's boiling, but it's not like a rapid boil. Actually, I might turn it up just a little bit. I'm kind of on medium high temperature. So after I brought the water up to a boil, I reduced the temperature because I don't want it to be too vigorous. But of course, as soon as I add the cold honey, it's going to slow down again. So just add the honey. So I'd say 350 grams is probably about a cup worth of honey. The other tool you need is a slotted spoon like this one, or if you have one of those, like they use in Asian cooking, it's called a spider spoon. If you have one of those, that'll work really well too. So I'm just going to give this a stir, bring this back up to a boil, because I just added a bunch of cold honey, so that's going to take a minute to get back up to boiling. While that gets back up to a boil, so I have a parchment lined cookie sheet over here. This is what I'm going to put the bagels on, and then they're going to go into the oven. The other thing I have over here is my sesame seeds, which I put into a shallow bowl, because what I like to do when I take them out of the water is I like to just sort of let them drain, and then I put them right into the sesame seeds and coat them on both sides. It's not the way the original recipe showed me, but the reason I'm doing it that way is because that's how they do it. If you go to St. Viateur Bagel in Montreal, they take them out of the boiling water and they go right into the sesame seeds. The wetness is going to help the sesame seeds stick to it. So now I've got my waters come back up to a boil. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. And you can really only boil about maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 bagels at a time. So I'm going to go in with my first bagel. There it goes, 1. And it sinks to the bottom, but then it will float. 2. 3. It better float. That's the other way you'll know that it's kind of risen. See, there we go. There, 1 has floated to the top. It has some ridges on it because it was sitting on a cookie rack. Okay, so once they kind of come up and float, you kind of know, okay, it's pretty much done. So it doesn't really take that long. And then I'm just going to scoop it up, let it drain as much as possible. And then it goes right into, just going to put the sesame seeds all over it. And then it goes onto my baking sheet. And I'll take the next one. Same thing, let it drain, throw it in there. Sesame seeds. I like lots of sesame seeds on my bagels. There we go. Drain, there it goes. Okay, so I'm just going to finish that up and then they're going to go into the oven. Okay, so here's my tray of bagels. They have a ton of sesame seeds on them. Some of them, one of them broke apart when I put it in the water because I guess I didn't attach it strongly enough, but it'll be fine once it bakes. So these are going to go into the 450 oven for 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll put the timer on for 15 minutes and then I will check after that and see how they're doing. Okay, so here they are out of the oven. Just out of the oven. These took 25 minutes. So even though the recipe said 15 to 20, I like a well done bagel. So there we go.